Okay, welcome. Thank you to coming to this session. I hope we make it worth your while. The genesis for this was talking with Henry about what would be useful for startups and potentially other investors to be familiar with when it comes to dealing with strategics on your board. And the thought really was to put together a bunch, or at least a couple of strategics, and then a few financial investors to really get the take about what it's like to have strategics on your board, how to work with them, and what things to avoid, what things just to be thoughtful about. So that really was the genesis of this. I have the dubious distinction of being both the moderator and a participant. My name is Nate Harrington. I'm with Philips. I'm in their corporate venture arm. I've been with Philips for 13 years. Most of my time has actually been on the BD M&A side of things, so I know what it's like to be on the other side, and before that I was with Boston Scientific, so I'll let my colleagues make their own brief introductions.
My name is Carissa Black. I am part of the Medtronic venture capital team. I've been with Medtronic for just about 20 years. Started in R&D and have been in a variety of roles since then. Last 8 years have been in the venture capital team.
Yep. I'm Auriel August. I'm with SANTÉ Ventures. I've been on the venture side for just a little over 3 years now, but initially trained as a physician before making the switch to the dark side, as talk about. And so we do early stage investing and often like to work with strategics.
Hi, my name is Janke Dittmer. I'm general partner with Gilde Healthcare. We are a transatlantic venture and growth capital fund with about 2.6 billion under management. I have a history of both doing independent venture as well as corporate venture in the past. And while we go into more detail, we have quite a lot of corporates also in our LP group. So really happy to be here in beautiful Portugal.
And I'm Alex Schmitz, a partner at Endeavour Vision, also a transatlantic growth stage investor in medical device technologies. I've been with the firm for about 10 years, and prior to that spent 10 years working in a business development strategy role at an interventional cardiology company.
Okay. The first, we have only about 4 questions or so that we wanted to go through, but the idea was to really sort of tease out some more information from all our perspectives. So we'll see how this works. First, we're going to start off as the CVCs with the idea about how do we think about investing in startups? Really, what are our motivations? How do we think about our responsibilities? And what are some of the implications in working with strategics? So I would say, generally speaking, most strategics, and I'll speak more with regards to Philips, and this is part of our new mandate, is we only invest in things that we feel like we're going to acquire. We still look at it very much from like a financial VC, looking at the fundamentals about return and what we will get back from it. But I would say we tend to think about getting a chance to see a company de-risked, get in, work with the management team along with our colleagues in VC, and setting it up for the best way possible, and trying to make it as successful as it can be. I really don't worry about the back end, the M&A, in terms as regards to Philips. Philips will have a chance, but I think what we're fundamentally trying to do is create good companies. And I think particularly when you have a director seat, you're always thinking first fiduciary, what's the right thing for the company? And then secondarily, which we all have to contend with, is as a shareholder, how do we look at this? And then thirdly, I have my Philips hat on. So that's, I would say, how we look at it. How is it at Medtronic?
Yeah, I would say fairly similar. Our first priority is investing in strategically relevant companies that we could acquire at some point. We definitely take the financials into consideration. We're trying to make good financial bets, whether or not Medtronic is the eventual owner. We like to see all of our companies eventually exit. I think a big part of how we look at things is we want to stay close to companies, make sure that we understand all of the nuances, inflection points, so that when there is a time for exit, Medtronic is in a good position to potentially acquire, as opposed to, not having all of the latest information and having to react quickly. We think that that's a distinct advantage for us, but also for our portfolio companies.
Any comments from the general crew? I don't know, Alex, how you look at it when you start to think about working with strategics and some of the differences in your motivations, perhaps, versus ours.
Yeah, I mean, we've partnered with strategic and corporate venture funds in several of our portfolio companies, and we've had many companies that we funded independently without corporate involvement. And I think there's pros and cons, just as there are pros and cons when you're selecting a financial investor. And I think a lot of it comes down to stage of the company, the sector that it's in, and ultimately kind of what the buyer universe or the exit path looks like. And I think with pretty much everything when you're raising money, I always try to start with the end state and then work backwards. And in thinking about bringing on a corporate venture partner, you should probably go through the same process. And in sectors like cardiology and structural heart, where companies tend to transact based on clinical data, there's a pretty well-established and somewhat limited buyer universe. Taking strategic money, I think, can be a really smart move because you're getting exposure and input from your universe of likely buyers. How you go about doing it and navigating some of the potential pitfalls around rights and information sharing, I think, is really important, and we'll probably get into more of that as the discussion unfolds. But I think it's, capital, wherever you can get it from, is essential to funding your startup. And I think you have to weigh the pros and cons of financial investors and strategic investors.
Janke or Auriel?
Yeah, I'd say it's no secret, particularly in medical devices, that majority of exits are through M&A. And as Alex mentioned, there is a limited buyer universe. And particularly as early stage investors, we're usually coming in at the seed or Series A. We're looking at exit timelines 5-7 years. And it's really nice to understand what are strategics looking at. Is this a particular area that they're interested in? It's also an opportunity to educate them along the path of why we're interested in this particular area. And too often I find that there's a almost adversarial aspect to it, in that we're trying to sell you something and they want to buy something. But I think if you come to it at the point of we both want to bring new innovation, we want something that's important, the corporates want something for growth, and how to work together along the process so that they understand how we're getting there and the decisions that are made, I think can be a really positive aspect. But I definitely will push back to not push back, but add to what Alex is saying, that where you are in the stage of the company and ultimately what the goals are of a strategic investor and why they would be investing in that is important to understand up front.
Yeah.
So I think while we're always trying to build companies that can stand on their own, obviously the public markets are unpredictable, and so an IPO exit is something we've done in probably 30-40% of our companies, and companies like Inari, Axonics, and CVRX, and many others. But you cannot bank on it. And I think one thing that people forget, that in our industry, actually, the customer is not the LPs who give us the money. They're the financiers. The customer is actually the people who buy the companies we build. And by and large, as you say, it's actually the strategics. So rather than having an adversarial relationship, why don't you just develop sort of customer intimacy, really try to understand and anticipate the unmet needs in 3 to 5 years. And you need to really go deep and sort of work closely with them. The other thing is that we want to have impact, right? Our motto is better care at lower cost. We're also an impact fund. So the way we achieve impact in an M&A situation is to make sure that the acquisition is successful. Actually, also, if half the PMIs, so post-merger integrations, fail, the willingness to pay the next time round will be about half, because they're going to discount that. How do you reduce the post-merger integration risk? Is like by partnering along the way and sort of de-risking that sort of relationship building. And most corporates don't want to buy sort of from a cold start. They usually have partnerships, investing, preceding that process. And I think this is something that is often overlooked. So we really believe in a collaborative relationship with strategics.
Yeah. The other question which had come up was really thinking about when do you want to consider having a strategic potentially on your cap table. And I know that this perspective, it seems, has changed a lot over the past 2 decades. I think there was always a wariness about having a strategic on the cap table. I think that has changed, and I've actually had VCs speak on sort of almost behalf of telling their founder, it's like, no, it's okay as long as you do it right. What are the things that you find most important in having discussions with your companies about bringing a strategic on? And I'm thinking in terms of how you think about reputations or perceptions of a given strategic, how you think about rights, and again, how you think almost about the individual of like, who's the person who's going to be in the seat, and things that you would advise startups, because you're probably in at an earlier stage than we are. Auriel, would you like to handle that one first? You go very early.
Very, very early. We have a few principles around when thinking about bringing in a strategic investor. As Alex also mentioned, you do need capital, and particularly right now, the capital environments have been tight, and so you always want to prepare those relationships. I think as far as one thing that we always think about, we like to say if you're going to have a strategic on your board, it's really nice to have 2. Just one so that you don't, because there are perceptions that you can get too deep in with one, where if you're lining up where a lot of your development has been in, you've shared a lot of your development process, that suddenly another strategic coming in later to drive a competitive process can feel like they're too far behind, or feel like you're already too deep in with one of whoever's on your cap table. So it is really nice if you can get 2 interests. Also, if there are different types of strategics, so there's the the Medtronics and the Philips that go kind of more structural. There's also kind of durable goods like the BDs and the BARDs that may bring different aspects to your production line as you're coming through development of the company. As far as advising our CEOs and thinking about that, in addition to the ideally it'd be great to have 2, it is you obviously don't want to give away rights too early. We always think about their equity and ownership in the company, trying to keep it above a certain level. If you have 2, you want to keep them at the same ownership level, fully diluted. Thinking through just what is best for the company, so then when you get to a point where it is ready for an acquisition, that there aren't things in the way that another person or another party coming in would be wary of.
Yeah, and I think it's just really important. And again, it's going to be specific to each situation. But maybe just a couple of specific things that come up frequently that you want to consider carefully. We had the discussion internally recently on a situation where there was a ROFN, right of first negotiation. And someone made a comment, oh, but that's pretty benign because it's just a right to negotiate. Yes and no. It's less, or it's more benign than a right of first refusal, but it still puts you on ice for a period of time. Where you can't go out and solicit other bids, and it still creates a potential negative signal if the party that had the ROFN, to the extent that that's disclosed, doesn't exercise it. Because in our business, whether it's as a financial sponsor, or strategic sponsor, or an acquirer, you're always wondering what do the folks on the inside know that we don't know, and diligence and the whole negotiation process is an attempt to close that asymmetry. But it's imperfect, right? And so if somebody has a right to negotiate and they don't exercise it, there's a signal in there. It's not always clear what the signal is, but it's not benign. There's another sort of profile where some strategics say, we don't want any rights, and we're going to give you a lot of money. And in the process, they take a pretty meaningful ownership stake on your cap table. So it looks pretty clean, but effectively that's an embedded discount that other bidders in the process won't have. And so it's not a right, but it's an asymmetry with respect to other potential bidders or buyers of the company. And again, there's no right or wrong answer to any of these questions, and there's nothing inherently good or bad about these provisions. They're just things that together with your outside counsel and your board, when you're considering taking on outside money. Again, this applies equally to the terms and provisions that financial sponsors will put into a deal. It's just pay attention to those terms. They're not necessarily benign, and if you understand what you're doing and you balance the risks and the benefits, you'll land in a good place. But nothing is without consequences. Those contracts all are there for a reason. I know it sounds silly, but again, people sometimes gloss over things that they later come back to regret.
Janke?
I think there is an interesting history on these terms. So when I entered the venture industry in 2005, 2006, it was quite common to have very, very strong rights. And I was part of the Corporate Venture Senior Executive Forum back then, and this was like a group therapy session for corporate venture groups. And so eventually we sort of socialized the idea that that was not good, right? That actually you're hurting yourself, you're hurting your returns as CVC, you're hurting your credibility, and you're hurting the companies. So then I think people went away from that, only arm's length. Some of them even did it for financial reasons, involved their pension funds to invest. And then you lose often this sort of strategic value add. And I think now we are in a phase where early stage capital is more difficult to get, where the terms are becoming more onerous again. So we have to be careful that we don't, as corporate ventures out there, so repeat some of the old mistakes. But in the end, it's kind of a very individual, per company, per case situation. So like just throwing something out there, if you bring in a company that would otherwise maybe not be a potential acquirer, but you kind of groom them, you make them comfortable over the course of several years to become an acquirer, that's a great thing. And we've done that in several of my portfolio companies. Taking in two, if you look at the statistics, one is better than none, two is better than one. But are you losing the collaboration with the first party when you bring in the second? So it really depends on how do they look at each other, how combative are they. In that sense, there's no easy sort of recipes for success, but I think hold back on the strong rights as long as you can.
Now, add to you also mentioned about kind of working with certain strategics and reputations and that sort of thing. And I said, ultimately, this world that we live in is reputation built. It's social capital. It's about relationships. And so you do want to think about those things and how the particular parties that you're bringing in. Same with venture capital, what investor you're working with. How does that board structure going to look like? Who are the folks there? And ultimately, some will have reputations versus others. Some CVCs think only strategic acquirers. Some look at more from a financial side. Some do both, and you have to understand what their motivations are. And so I think it's really important when you are constructing your board to think about those pieces, and ultimately, you never want to burn any bridges, right? Like that's just rule number one. But it is especially important in medical devices where that world is so small and the land of acquirers is pretty close.
So what do you think about that, having heard that? I'll say a few things, but first, Carissa.
Yeah, so interesting to hear everyone's perspectives. I think, at Medtronic, we don't ask for rights in our agreements. We might have a board seat, board observation seat. In the case where we have a board seat, I'm on a board with Auriel, where I'm a director. We have another strategic who has a director seat. We have fiduciary responsibilities to the company, and I think in that case we also have someone from our operating unit who's a board observer. My perception, we're all working in tandem to help the company achieve success. We provide insight into clinical design, regulatory strategy, and I feel like in the right circumstances it can be a win-win for everyone. In that case, neither strategic has rights, but I think both are helping the company, and at the same time, hopefully potential acquirers down the line who are well informed about the company's operations.
And if I reflect back upon our portfolio, we have some where we have rights and we have some where we don't. But I would say, I think over time it's changed a great deal. I think the days of ROFRs are generally long gone. But sometimes it comes down to the position that a company is in and find themselves. You have to remember that as a strategic, even though I may be thinking like this, or at least I try to, like a VC and what's most important, I have stakeholders too. And one of the other things is, this is a known fact, strategics hate to miss out. So the purpose of a ROFN, whether it's first right of notification or negotiation, and it's good to know the differences, is to put some people at ease. It's like, we're putting in a fair amount of money, we're investing our time, we want to see this go well, we don't want to miss out. At the same time, I often try to counsel internally that if we don't get certain rights, it should be okay. Any company is going to want to bring as many people to the process that they can. So odds are we won't be missing out. But it is one of those things that people have their own motivations, and like with most of us, you have your partnership, we have the people holding the purse strings that we need to at least be mindful of. I think what was brought up with reputations, I think is very important. I look at it the same way with financial VCs. It really matters who's going to be in the seat and who you're working with, and that's something I think true for anyone you let on your cap table or have on your board, is you want to be very mindful of how you all work together. The next question that we brought up, money aside, what do strategics actually bring to the table, and what do you expect to get from them? Janke, we'll start off with you first.
So there's a whole host. So if you accept the thesis that at least for us as VCs, corporates are our customers, we need to understand what are their purchase criteria, right? How they're going to look at companies. So getting through a corporate M&A process, if you have done that before, you know how hard it is. Even several buyers in parallel is even harder. So my role often as a VC is kind of to try to sort of do a test run while we do the diligence, but you're never going to do quite the same as a corporate would do. So basically having a corporate investor means you're actually starting to get M&A ready. Your data room is in good shape, your quality system is in good shape. There's things that reduce the risk for an acquirer in terms of the post-merger integration. So that's one function that's, I think, very, very important and not to be underestimated. The other function is to bring the commercial perspective, sort of reimbursement, some of the regulatory things, but I think regulatory we've got typically pretty well under control. What are the clinical trials that actually drive adoption once the company is commercial? How do you scale internationally? Is the manufacturing set up in a way that is sustainable and allows you to compete ultimately in the market? And what does the team need to look like? And the good corporate investors that I've seen operating, they can bring a lot of value add in terms of people, in terms of expertise, even opening up their own internal reimbursement departments to say, sure, we get some free advice here. And I think the deeper that those relationships are, the more value you're going to get out of it. You've got to be careful, obviously, that you don't get so deeply involved that you reveal your deepest secrets at every level of the way. You need to understand what's your sustainable uniqueness. But I generally err on the side of, there's more things to be won than to be lost in the process of collaborating and going deep there.
I'll say maybe from thinking even on the earlier side before the kind of the commercial aspect, which is definitely important as you're getting into later stage companies, a great way is really having access to their business unit. So you're all thinking, ultimately, usually the strategic investor that's on your cap table has a business unit in that particular clinical area that they're investing in. So they're seeing the entire landscape. They may have access to great KOLs. They know the great animal labs for early stage, kind of first in human, early preclinical studies. Really utilizing their network, like you mentioned, it's much wider than what a lot of startups will have access to. So as you're working through the process, if you can really leverage their contacts, it can be very, very valuable.
Alex?
Not much to add. Those are pretty comprehensive. I mean, maybe just one thing is also tapping in just to the operational supply chain manufacturing competencies within the strategics. They know a lot about how to build things at scale, and ultimately as a buyer, they're going to be thinking about not only is this a good product, does it have great data, is it a huge market, but can I make enough of these at scale, at margins in my organization that I've got a business? Because if I can't, or I anticipate big problems in integrating, that's going to either dissuade you from buying a company or impact the purchase price. So in addition to the clin reg and the commercial folks, I wouldn't overlook the operational and supply chain folks. And as a startup, you're not producing at that scale, but making sure that your product can be designed for manufacturability in the arms of a large corporate is really important. And I think if you bake that in up front, again, start with the end game in mind and work backwards, that can help. In the strategics, I think, have tremendous capabilities and resources that if they're on your cap table, you should definitely pick up the phone and tap into it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of things that you've left sort of off that we would like to think that we bring to the table. I agree, definitely the strategic and industry perspective. I mean, I feel fortunate, I hope my companies feel fortunate, of having me on where I've been on the other side and having to go through M&A and what that means, because it is really all about de-risking. And different strategics, when it comes to acquiring, have different levels of comfort about the risk that they want to take on. Not everything has to be commercial and proven out there. A lot of things, as we know, in the PMA space go early, and it's really all about de-risking up to a point. So, having a strategic on will give you those insights, and then having access to our functional subject matter experts. I can't think of the number of times where I've made the introductions to someone in regulatory or someone in R&D. And it's a tricky thing, because even as a strategic, you have to be careful that you don't want to lead them, because they are not building this for you. You're just trying to provide insights to make sure that it's de-risked and that they don't do things wrong. But it is a tricky thing that you don't want to get too deep with any one strategic's perspective. And we don't, for a lot of reasons. Legal aside, you don't want to go down too far. The other thing, which I think is always good to be mindful of, is access to materials. I mean, we've loaned a lot of imaging equipment to folks when they need that. So there's other tangible aspects that you can get from having a partner who happens to be a strategic. Carissa.
Yeah, one other piece which I touched upon earlier, I think when we bring forward a new investment, we have an investment committee, which are senior leaders in the company. These are areas that they may not have visibility to, early stage companies that might not actually transact for 5 years. So I think having that level of visibility within our company, and also the focus that of an investment brings for us, for our business unit partners, it's a less tangible benefit, but I do think it helps bringing strategics along in the process in a way that if we didn't make the investment, we can definitely follow the companies, but we have a lot more focus when we have the investment.
Okay, and the last question that we had, which is really hitting some of the trickier situations that can come up with strategics. And some of these, I would say, are ubiquitous, like follow-on funding and what people are willing to do. I think every now and then you hear the horror story of, well, they had a really bad quarter, and there's a payment coming up or a chance to get into the next round. How are they going to react on that? How also you deal with sales processes and conflicts of interest. And then there's always the ubiquitous possibility that their strategy may change, and they look at things differently. How do you think about some of those thornier or potentially thornier aspects, Alex?
There's a fourth that I would add to the list. They develop a competing product. Not kidding.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but I think that is unfortunately the biggest, almost existential risk that you have to be aware of, because to the extent that your IP doesn't prevent somebody from doing that, or to the extent that your investment agreements don't prevent one of your strategic partners from doing that. It can and has happened. And so it's something to think about. So, but again, your investors, financial sponsors can also do things that turn out to be not so great for the company. So again, it's just things to look out for when taking money from anybody, right? But I think, you know, the change in strategy is one. But to one of your comments, Nate, on the pre-call, that can happen with financial sponsors too. It's more related to fund life cycle and sort of, you know, funds, if they've been in a company for a while, may not have enough capital to follow on, and so they're not investing, or maybe they had a change in strategy. They used to do medtech and biotech, and now they're just doing biotech. My sense, and I'd be curious what the panel thinks, is that it's a little bit easier. It's never easy to explain why one of your existing investors isn't following on. It's generally not a good signal, so if you can avoid it, avoid it. But when a strategic doesn't follow on, I think the default is to interpret that as a sign that this is no longer strategic. And as much as you might point to a bad quarter, a change in leadership, a change in the team at the CVC organization, the default interpretation when a strategic doesn't follow on is they don't either like this product or they don't like this category. And that's probably the hardest thing to navigate. I don't have any real solutions there, but I think the best thing is probably if strategics can minimize the situations in which they don't follow on, because there is, at least in my view, more of a negative signal than when a financial investor does it. Although even in that scenario, it's never good when people don't follow on.
So to start with, I think as an entrepreneur here in the room, it's probably good to assume that in the 5 to 7 years, you're going to basically partner with this corporate as part of your cap table until an exit or an IPO. The strategy will change, right? I think that's a given. I've not seen any corporate venture organization that has not, within a 7-year period, changed the strategy. So that's a given. People will change, right? So very important, you know, how you build relationships with the champions on the other side, because it's not about corporates, it's about people. And that is a big investment, and you're probably going to spend more time understanding a corporate and getting value out of them than a financial investor. So you need to have that capacity, you need to plan for that. I think the corporate venture units have gotten smarter. So back in 2000, when the dot-com hit, they all were just as dumb as the rest of the market in getting out of CVC. And then I think in 2008, something interesting happened. You know, it was a much sort of softer landing. And I think recently you see, hey, people understood you need to basically invest through all the cycles. So I think that's a compliment I want to make to the CVCs. They know they need to be there for a long time to reap the benefits of what they do. But you know, there can be contentious situations. I think one of the most important things in the legals is to have a good conflict of interest clause, so that you as a board have the possibility to send a corporate board member out of the room. And of course, there's ways to stay in the room. We had 2 corporate investors in one company, and they needed to declare that they're not interested in the M&A that was going on to stay in the room. And unfortunately, they both basically declared, we thought they were buying it, but they wanted to stay in the room. So that's tough luck, but you have these instruments, and I think that's very good for corporate governance.
Nothing more particularly to add. I think that what you mentioned about corporate strategy changing, and when a strategic doesn't follow on, it does tend to be a pretty negative signal to raising outside capital. So learning how to manage that, and also plays back into not getting too deep in with one particular strategic and following their strategy that may have now changed over the next 3 to 4 years, and now maybe you've gotten too far down a certain path that was really important to that particular party and now needing to pivot. So just being really mindful of the decisions you're making along the way and how much the corporates that are there are influencing that versus what's best for the company, what's best for the overall space, how to be best in class there, and building a good product that would be interesting to multiple parties is ultimately always going to be what's best.
Reflections on that?
Yeah, so when we enter into new investments, we're investing for the long term, contemplating follow-on rounds, seeing the companies to exit. Obviously, you know, things evolve as, you know, companies develop, and I would say it's a pretty nuanced decision. Strategy on follow-on strategy does come into play. There are other times where it just might not be a good financial investment. So just like private venture firms are making their decisions, that might be one of the reasons why. But overall, we're investing for the long term, and I can think of situations where we had a company being acquired by another strategic, so it was definitely not on our strategy anymore, and we continue to invest and support the company. So I think it's a pretty nuanced decision-making process, at least internally at Medtronic.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing. I think when we sign up for this, as I like to say, these are the gifts that keep on taking, and you really do need to educate your management that you are committed. And I think even when Philips has been in recent tough times for the past 2 years, I think for virtually all our follow-ons, we committed through, so we never used that as an excuse. But I think it also goes to the point that Carissa brought up, is you still got to believe that there's an attractive exit. Even if it's gone off strategy, you still got to believe there's an attractive exit, there's enough acquirers out there. The company has to be fundamentally performing well, otherwise everyone's going to make the same decision. But I think as long as those two elements are in place and you have a good syndicate around the table, good strategics who are mature in their thinking, their CVCs, will be disciplined and follow on with bridge funding. I know that this has been the year or two of the bridge, and keeping things going. And I think the more mature CVCs that you deal with out there recognize that. I'm always struck when I hear that someone wouldn't follow up as long as everything's going well. I see we're coming down to our last minute, so we're not really going to have time for Q&A. Any parting thoughts? We'll start down at the end of the line with Alex on words of wisdom.
No words of wisdom, but I think I think picking the right strategic partner and thinking through all of the topics and issues that we talked about is important. But it's a very powerful tool and one that we've employed successfully in our portfolio. And so for those of you that are in a position to partner with strategics, strongly encourage you to do it.
I would say partner with people, don't partner with companies. Even if there's a risk that they may be gone, there will be new people that you'll make your champion internally. That's really important. And it's about horses for courses. So look at the very specific situations in your market and the sort of force field and imagine, as you say, sort of do a retropolation where you say, I've just kind of done a successful exit. What would I have done in 2014, 2015? How would I have constructed my corporate engagement strategy along the way? I think that will make us all kind of more successful as players in this ecosystem.
Yeah, maybe understand your customer, understanding the strategics. How are they different? How are they alike? What are their different motivations? Why would they want to invest in your company? Why would they not want to? And I think the better you can kind of landscape and understand your buyer, your customer, you can help build the company better and partner better with them in the future.
I think my biggest takeaway message, which I'm biased, is done in the right way. I think bringing a strategic into the company and cap table can benefit the company, other investors, and the strategic. So I think it could be a win-win all around.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, I'm biased, so I would see it the same way. One other comment I would make is even if you decide not to or something doesn't work out, I think this goes back to, there are other panels on this, but engage early. I think it's always important to have a relationship with your potential acquirers. I say that plural. Talk early. Figure out with whom in the company you need to speak to, but try to keep an open mind that maybe there is a right time and a right partner for having a strategic on the cap table and in your board. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.